Hi friends, it's week 2 of our Crochet Sockalong, and I could not be more excited because this week we're going to go ahead and dive in to probably the most finicky part of a crochet sock, and the part of the crochet sock that everybody, I feel like, wants to give up on because it is complicated. We're going to cover a lot of information in this class. We're going to start out by recapping week 1. I'm going to talk about week 2, and I'm going to take you stitch by stitch through what we're going to cover this week. Then we'll do a little bit of a recap, and I'll tell you what we're going to cover next week. This class here, week 2, we're basically going to be covering the gusset, the heel wedge, and the heel itself. Now, we're not going to get into where the heel ends and the leg meets. You'll have to watch next week's video for that, along with some really cool customization options. So there's still quite a bit to learn about these crochet socks. So let's talk about last week. So last week, I'm going to grab my sock here. Last week we covered the toe, which was here, and we worked the foot. Now you should have worked the foot until it is 3 inches less than your desired finished foot length. Now, the reason we do that is because this week we're going to be working the gusset, which means we're going to still be working on the length of the foot. I know some people were confused and they thought that was the total length of the foot. It's not. We still have quite a few rounds to go until we finish the actual length of the foot. But for now, you should have worked the toe, you should have increased out, and you should have worked the foot until it is 3 inches less than your desired foot length, all right? So what are we doing this week? Well, we already worked, like I said, our toe and our foot. We're going to be working this portion here. It's hard to see on camera, but right here where I'm tracing with my crochet hook, that's a gusset. Now, a gusset is an additional bit of fabric that if you're like a sewer, you'd actually sew this in crochet and knitting. We can actually just increase stitches and plop it in right there. Then, after we work our gussets, we're going to work our heel wedge. That's located right here. Then we're going to work our heel, which is right here. A lot of tongue twisters there. Heel here. The heel is right here. And that's where we'll stop this week. Next week, I'll show you actually how to keep going with the leg. It's not as easy as just crocheting around and around and finishing. There are some tips and tricks that I need to show you to avoid holes, which occur usually in this area right here. And there's some very specific skills that you need to know when moving from the back and forth portion of the heel to working in the round for the leg. So this is what I did. This was just my sample sock. I made my square toe, I increased out, and I worked the foot. One important thing to note, I received a lot of questions on this sock toe portion of the pattern. And that's because in the pattern itself, it instructs you to work to a specific size and then to move on to the foot. And there was a lot of confusion that was happening there. That's totally okay. I understand how that happens. Here's the dealio. When we have a large number of sizes within a pattern, it's imperative that we make it as easy to understand and as clear and concise. I know a lot of crocheters don't understand why we use kind of shorthand and abbreviations. The reason we do that is because think about all the words that I'm cramming into this 30 or 40 minute video class, and imagine that on a paper. Every single pattern would be a book, right? It's going to be a lot, and nobody wants that in their life. So what we do is we try to make it as clear as we can. The best kind of tip of advice I can give you is to go through your pattern. You can do this now, even if you haven't done it yet, and highlight all of the numbers that are specific to your pattern size. That's going to help you to know where you need to go. If the size that you're highlighting isn't there, such as in some areas on the toe, and that's the only place that it will occur on your pattern. But if it's not there, that means that you probably shouldn't be doing that. I've made really a concerted effort to make sure that everything was as clear as can be. So at this point, what I would do is try to find which number you are in your size. Like if you're doing the third size, you would be the third number in the range, and go through and highlight it all the way through your pattern. That way when you come to it, you automatically know you need to follow that highlighted. It's just a little tip that I like to throw out there for people that are having trouble kind of keeping track. We are doing a lot. Remember, this is not a beginner project by any means. You guys are doing some really advanced beginner, intermediate level crocheting, and you should be incredibly proud of yourself because we're covering a ton of information and we're packing it into a few short weeks. Remember, I've been crocheting socks almost my entire design career, and you're just starting out. You're doing an amazing job, and you should all give yourselves a pat on the back because what I've seen so far is nothing short of incredible. I'm really proud of all of you. All right, so enough of that. Let's talk about this week. So you're going to need stitch markers this week. You're going to need 4 stitch markers. Now, I think it's really important if you have different color stitch markers. The reason for that is it's going to make things easier to see visually. I am a visual crocheter. You're probably getting that based on my patterns. This is my current way of writing patterns. I didn't used to write them this way, but I discovered over the years that I like patterns to be very, very clear. And that's why I write everything out. Sometimes it's exhausting for my tech editors, but it's really important. So when you're looking through your pattern this week, you'll notice that once you get to the gusset section, which is where we are, I explained that the gusset is worked in spiral rounds, just as how we've been working the foot. We will increase stitches each round at 2 distinct points to form the gusset. This is another name for an extra bit of fabric. The gusset should not be skipped, as this will give the sock its customized fit and feel. That's extremely important, okay? For this section, you'll need 4 markers, preferably 3 colors. One of color A. For that, we'll use green. 2 of color B. For those, I'm going to use yellow. And 1 of color C. For that, I'll use orange. Color A, which is my green, is going to represent the beginning of my round. Color B, which is my yellow, those are going to represent the top of my foot stitches, and color C is going to represent my second gusset, okay? So it's not imperative that they be different colors, but it does help a lot. So let's get started by working our gusset. Now I am going to work this in a different color because I think it's going to be easier for you all to see rather than just continuing to work in the blue that I have. So I'm going to switch to this cream color here. And I will be, reading from the pattern. So if you want to follow along, I don't recommend that you stitch along with me. That might get a little confusing. But I always recommend that you watch this video all the way through, beginning to end, following along with me in the pattern. And then, after you're done watching, you go ahead and try it on your own. If you try to do it as I'm doing it, I'm probably just going to confuse you. But if you watch this all the way through once, and then go try it on your own, and you can have this playing in the background to help you through some of those trickier bits, okay? All right, so I've changed my color here. Now I'm still going to be working in extended single crochet, and I'm going to go into my very first stitch of the round. And for that, I'm going to work 2 extended single crochets in that stitch. If you need a recap on how to do extended single crochets or anything like that, go ahead and watch week 1's video. I explain all of that in there. I'm just going to assume you know how to do those extended single crochets and you know how to work in spiral rounds. You're pretty good on where we are. Okay, so now that we've made those first 2 stitches, we need to grab our very first marker, our color A, and insert it into the very first stitch we made. Okay, then we're going to grab 1 of the color B markers and put it into the second stitch we made. So we worked 2 extended single crochets into the first stitch. We have a marker in the first one and a marker in the second one. Then we're going to work extended single crochet stitches in each of the next 16 extended single crochet. So there's 1, 2, 3, 4, and I'm just speeding along here. 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, 13, 14, 15, and 16. Into the very next extended single crochet, we're going to work 2 extended single crochets. So for this little increase that we did, we're going to take our color B marker, so our second color B, and put that in the very first stitch. And in the next stitch, we'll put our last stitch marker. Now there are photographs within the pattern that will show you this up close, and that way if you're more of a pattern person, you like to read those, this is in the pattern, okay? So we have those. Then I'm going to work extended single crochets in each of the next 18 extended single crochets. So for this round, we've effectively increased 2 stitches. We've worked 2 groups of 2 extended single crochets into 1 stitch, and we've marked those stitches. So I've worked all the way across. This part, the last set of 18, or the last kind of set, it's 18 to 32 stitches, depending on your size. But the last little, I guess we'll call it run of extended single crochet stitches we did right here. So no matter what size you're doing, no matter where we're increasing, these are going to stay the same. So the number of stitches I did was 18 because I'm doing the smallest size. So these 18 stitches, the very last 18 stitches, will always stay the same. You'll never increase and you'll never decrease these stitches. Now if you turn your sock sideways, what we're effectively doing is increasing stitches towards the bottom of our foot. These are going to stay the same, and this part is going to grow. And when this continues to grow out, because we're going to keep increasing stitches right here, what we're going to do is add a bit of fabric. So you can see here, this was the full kind of circumference of my sock. As I've increased stitches for my gusset, this now becomes the full circumference of my sock. Now, the reason we do this is to account for larger ankles. Large ankles are the scourge of crochet socks. When you have a larger ankle or an ankle circumference that is not, let's say, average, crochet socks don't want to fit. It has to do with that whole thing about crochet socks not really having a ton of stretch. So when we make these gussets, we do that to account for the ankle circumference around the heel. So effectively, we want our sock to be able to stretch this way right here a lot more than what it would normally stretch here. So if you look here, if we try to stretch it, we're only getting about that much stretch. But diagonally, because of these gussets, when I pull this, we're getting a ton of stretch. That's going to make sure that it fits over your ankle, over your heel, and onto your leg, giving you a customized fit. All right, so now that we know the anatomy of kind of where our sock is headed, which we'll see a little bit more as we continue to work, let's move on to gusset round 2. So for round 2, we're going to remove our marker and just set it off to the side. And into our very first stitch, we're going to work 2 extended single crochets. Now this is very important. We want to move our marker we just took out to the very first extended single crochet of that 2 extended single crochet group. So whenever we put a 2 extended single crochet group into 1 stitch at the beginning of the round, we always mark the very first stitch. I'm going to take out the next marker and into that stitch work an extended single crochet. Replace my marker into that stitch that I just made. Now, you should have a marked stitch, one stitch that is not marked, and then your next marked stitch. This stitch in the middle here is an increased gusset stitch. So it's just kind of hanging out right there. We want that, okay? You want to see space in between these two markers. Now I'm going to work extended single crochets all the way around until I get to my next marker. All right, so when I get color B marker, I'm going to remove that. I'm going to work an extended single crochet into that stitch that was marked. Then I'm going to replace my marker into the stitch I just made. Then I'm going to remove my color C marker. I'll work 2 extended single crochets into that stitch. I'll take my color C marker and mark the second extended single crochet of those 2 that I just made. Again, I'm putting an extra, or I'm making sure that there's an unmarked extended single crochet in between each of my 2 marked stitches. Then I'm going to work extended single crochets all the way back to my beginning of the round. So now I'm crocheting all the way back. I'm to that very first marked stitch, which is my beginning of round. Now I'm just going to repeat this process over and over again. I'll remove my marker for the beginning of round, my color A. I'll work 2 extended single crochets. I'll mark my very first stitch of that 2-stitch group. Now I'm going to work an extended single into the next stitch and into the stitch after that, moving my marker up. And now I should have 2 unmarked extended single crochet stitches in between my markers. See how that works? So here's what you're going to do. You're going to work a number of gusset rounds depending on your size. So if you're making the smallest size, you would just do 6 gusset rounds. If you're doing the larger size, you would do 10. At the very end, you should have increased between 8 and 16 stitches depending on your size. This is where highlighting that size is going to come into play, and it's going to make it a lot easier to figure out where you are. At the end of your gussets, you should have between 48 and 84 extended single crochets. When you finish your gusset, you're going to have something that looks like this. You'll have your toe, you'll have the length of your foot. We stopped and only worked this much during week 1. Here, you'll have increased stitches out like this, creating those gussets. Now, if those gussets weren't there, you would just have a straight tube that looks like this. But accounting for that extra bit of fabric that we increased on each side, we're now kind of arcing out. Cool, right? Now this is a really cool close-up of what we're looking at here. So I can, if I look real close, I'll be able to see that this is the beginning of my round. And essentially, what we did was we created an extra bit of fabric right here. So all of this was fabric that wasn't there before. And while it doesn't look like a whole lot, this is actually going to have a vast impact on the fit and the feel of your sock. This right here is going to make sure that your socks fit the first time, every time. It seems like a really small, minute thing, doesn't it? Just increasing a few stitches on either side of the sock. But it makes a huge difference. It really allows the sock to stretch in the ways that it needs to stretch in order to fit. After you have completed your gussets, we're going to move on to what's called the heel wedge. Now, in most crochet and knit sock patterns that feature a heel that is not a short row or an afterthought heel, we have to do what's called turning the heel. Now, turning the heel is just a really fancy way of saying after we've completed the gussets, we need to change direction of how we're working. We've started here and we've worked in this direction. Now, somehow we have to be able to turn our work to start working like this. So how do we do that? Well, we do that by turning a heel. Turning a heel is one of the dirtiest words that I've ever heard when it comes to crochet or knit socks. I know it's not really, but listen, people get so freaked out by heel turns because traditionally they've been done with short rows or they've been done with increases and decreases, and it feels incredibly complicated. And I was like, you know what? I don't want to do that. I want to create a way that we can turn our work and it would be easy to do and not stressful, because crochet shouldn't be stressful. That's just my opinion. So before we move on to actually working about the anatomy of what we're looking at, even though it's explained in the pattern, I feel like showing you visually might be a little bit helpful. So essentially, we have our very first stitch, which is right here, and that's marked by our blue marker. Then we have our first gusset stitch, which is marked by our yellow marker. And in between these two yellow markers, that marks the top of our foot. On the reverse side of what we're working on, we have our blue marker, which is for the beginning, and we have our orange marker, which is marker A and marker C. This kind of section here is where we're actually going to be working our heel wedge. So this is the bottom of our foot. And is it important whether or not you have the bottom or top? Not really, because we're doing a basic sock here. But if you were doing a pattern sock, you would have the pattern continuing as we work up and work our gussets. The pattern would continue in between these two yellow markers here, with our gusset stitches being on the side and our extended single crochets across the bottom right here. So the reason that it's important that we kind of make sure that our stitch count is consistent, that we make sure that everything is lining up as we're working it, is just because we want to make sure that we're able to put our heel where it needs to go for the best fit and function. All right, so let's pretend that I have my heel or my gussets complete. I have all my stitches, and we're going to move on to our heel. So for our heel wedge, you can do one of two things. The pattern, which I have in front of me, just simply says to chain one, turn work, and then go from there. You can do that, or if you're feeling like you're afraid this is going to be a little loose because you're a looser chainer or anything like that, you can always slip stitch into your very first stitch just to give yourself a little anchor. This is just optional. It's what I like to do. So we're going to chain one, and we're going to turn our work to work into the wrong side, okay? So now we're working with the wrong side facing. I'm going to work an extended single crochet two together. To do that, I insert my hook into the very first stitch and pull up a loop, and then chain one. Insert my hook into the next stitch and pull up a loop, and then chain one. I'll have 3 loops on my hook. I yarn over and pull through all 3. Then I'm going to extend a single crochet in each stitch across until I get to the last 2 extended single crochet before the next marker. So remember, I am working between my very first marker and my very last marker. So my marker A and marker C. My B markers are on the complete other side of the sock. Whoops. So I want to go to 2 stitches before the next marker, and I'm going to work an extended single crochet 2 together. So remember, to do that, I insert my hook into the next stitch and pull up a loop and chain 1, insert my hook into the next stitch and pull up a loop and chain 1, then I yarn over and pull through all 3. Here, I've decreased 2 stitches of those stitches in between the markers, so I'll have 2 less than I did when I ended my gusset section. So I'm going to go ahead and work row 2. For that, I'm going to chain 1 and turn. I'm going to work an extended single crochet 2 together again. Then I'll just work extended single crochets in each stitch across to the very last 2 extended single crochets. When I get to the last 2, I'm simply going to work an extended single crochet 2 together. Then I'll chain 1 and I'll turn. Now we're just going to repeat this row a total of however many times are listed on the pattern. For my size, that's a total of 6 rows. Now it's not 6 rows plus the 2 that I just finished, it's just a total. So you want to make sure to count your rows, okay? So after you've finished your heel, you should end after working a right side row, so you'll end with the wrong side facing you. So essentially it should kind of look like this, all right? Now we're going to start, it's kind of like the sides of the heel. We're not quite working the heel yet, but we're laying the foundation for working the heel. So I've already chained 1. I'm going to single crochet in each of the stitches across just the top of the wedge here. Then I'm going to just kind of rotate my work a little bit, and I need to crochet into the row ends. Now the great thing is that you're going to crochet in every single row end. So if you did 10 rows for this wedge, you're going to single crochet 10 stitches down, working into every row end. So you're just going to find where one of your rows was, which is right here, and I'll work a stitch. So 1, you don't have to be exact, 2, let's do 3 and 4, 5 and 6. And this is all we're going to do. Then you'll notice that there's going to be this little tiny space of a stitch at the base of this stitch here before our very first mark stitch. We're going to slip stitch into that stitch, all right? Then we're going to chain 1 and turn our work. We're going to skip that slip stitch and single crochet in each of the row ends, or the single crochets that we worked into the row ends, and the stitches along the top of the wedge. Then, working into the second set of row ends, we're going to do the same thing again. Work 1 single crochet for each row. So there's 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, and 6. Then we're going to slip stitch into that first mark stitch. And what we've done here is effectively turned a heel, because now we got this little cool little baby sock. This is our little wedge part. Now we're going to start working up like this for our heel. How cool is that? It was so easy to do. I told you, this heel is really, really fun to do, and it's really easy. So I'm actually going to change colors again because I want you to be able to see what I'm doing. And now we're going to be working the sides of our heel. So I'm going to put a slip knot on and just join this yarn so I can get back to business. So for row 1 of our heel, we're going to work with the wrong side facing. We're going to extended single crochet in each stitch across. So it'll vary based on the size that you're working. And we're just going to work extended single crochets. And again, I'm just speeding along because you guys, we have a lot of stitches to cover here, and you all know exactly what you're doing. When you get to it, go ahead and pop out that color C marker. And now we're simply going to slip stitch into our first gusset stitch. All right? Then we chain 1 and we turn. We skip the slip stitch and we go into our very first extended single crochet stitch, and we extended single crochet in each stitch across. Until we get to our very last stitch. And of course I have these ends here because I've been changing colors. You won't have those, of course. So I'm going to get all the way. Here's my very last stitch. I'm going to work an extended single crochet 2 together. So I'm going to work the first half here. Then I'm going to find my very first gusset stitch on this side of the sock and pull up a loop and do my chain 1. And then I'm going to pull through and work my extended single crochet 2 together with my very last stitch of my heel and my very first gusset stitch, or my next gusset stitch. Now you'll notice there's a little hole here. If you're getting holes on yours, that's totally normal. I actually had them on mine and I was able to close them up at the end, and I'll show you how to do that next week. Right now, don't worry about that. I'm going to take out my marker and I'm going to slip stitch into my next stitch. Then I'm going to turn my work, chain 1, and extended single crochet in each stitch across. I'm going to skip that slip stitch, of course, until I get to the other side. Now, my markers are a little bit closer than what yours will be because you increased more stitches. And the length of your heel, so the total length from the end of your heel wedge until you get to your leg, is going to vary based on the size. So larger sizes are going to have a longer heel, shorter sizes will have a shorter heel. The heel will stretch to fit a wide variety and a wide range of sizes, but the length is kind of set. So again, what I'm going to do, I come to my very last stitch. I'm going to insert my hook into the last stitch on the heel and pull up a loop, and then do my chain 1, and then on my next unworked stitch on my gusset, I'll pull up a loop and chain 1, then yarn over and pull through all 3, then insert my hook into the next stitch and slip stitch, chain 1 and turn. So I'm going to do that one more time for you guys. So what we're doing here is we're working the back of the heel, and we're working in rows to kind of give us the length that we need in order to have a really good heel fit. Because if the heel is too short, the sock won't stay up. So we want a really nice deep heel so the sock stays up, so that it wears really well and doesn't rip on you and doesn't fall out. But even more than that, we want the length of the heel. If I grab my sample here, the length of the heel here is also determined by how many gusset stitches we need to decrease. So the longer heels are longer because we have more gusset stitches that we need to decrease. So mine, here on my little my little baby sample sock, is a little bit, it's much shorter than what a normal sock heel would be because I don't have a whole lot of gusset stitches that I'm worried about. All right, so I've reached the end of my row. I'm going to insert my hook into the very last stitch of my heel and pull up a loop and chain 1, and then find my next unworked stitch. So look closely, you'll see that this stitch here has something worked into it. That was my slip stitch from the last round. So I'm going to go on my next unworked stitch and pull up a loop, chain 1, then yarn over, pull through 3, and then slip stitch into my next stitch. And that is all you're going to do. And what we're doing here, again, we're decreasing our gusset stitches without actually decreasing them, and we're working our heel, and we're creating the exact number of stitches we need to continue working the foot. It's actually really, really cool. Math is cool sometimes when I can actually do it. So for your heel section, this will say however many rows you have to do, and this will give you all the directions. On your very last row, you're going to chain 1 and turn, skip the slip stitch, and then extended single crochet across to the last stitch. You'll extended single crochet 2 together, picking up 1 loop on the last stitch and 1 loop on the next stitch on the gusset. So the only thing you're going to do different on your last row that you did on, let's say, your first or your second row is you won't slip stitch into the next stitch. And that is what it'll look like when you're almost done. This is after your first few rows. But after you get completely done, this is what it will look like. You'll have this nice little heel area. So obviously you won't have this, but you'll have all of this. Now next week, we're going to cover how to finish the heel to prepare for the leg, how to get rid of some of those holes that occur when you're joining the heel, or even when you start to work the leg. Sometimes you'll get some holes. I'm going to show you some really cool customization options, including factoring in different colors, different stitch patterns, how to size the calf of your sock to work with larger calves or smaller calves. And yeah, next week is going to be a whole lot of fun because we kind of got all the hard parts out of the way. So now we get to have fun, we get to customize, we get to personalize, and we get to make it our own. So I hope you had a lot of fun joining me today for week 2 of our crochet sock along. Until next week, friends, happy stitching. Bye, y'all.
Thanks so much for joining me on the Marley Bird YouTube channel. If you liked what you saw, don't forget to hit subscribe. I've put a link right over there, or you can watch a couple of the videos I've already selected for you right down there. If you want to follow me on social media, I've put my links right over there. You could have all Marley all the time. Bye guys.